You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably, with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Somebody there?
Hello, once again, to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained, Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson.
and we have another haunted house story this week. I know, big surprise.
Now, if you were a Girl Scout, this show would be of interest to you.
And this one actually comes from Scotland, correct? Or no, the original people came from Scotland.
Right, but it takes place in the South.
The South, okay.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of haunted houses in the South.
Oh,
There's
God,
no
yes.
question.
Yeah.
So this will be interesting to find out this particular story.
Right. This is the history of the Andrew Lowe house. Andrew Lowe was 16 years old when he left his motherland of Scotland, and he set his sights on the New World, America. He was an ambitious teenager, and he thought that America was the best place for him. As soon as he arrived in Savannah, Georgia, he went straight to work in his uncle's cotton firm. He would later become a partner in the business, but those first few years he knew nothing about cotton. But he knew that if he wanted to become successful as a cotton factor, it was necessary that he could learn everything that he could about the business, and so he did. And by 1843, Lowe was a young man with the whole world before him. He was wealthy, he was a man of clout, and the only thing left to do was marry and build a home of his own. So he married Sarah Cecil Hunter, and he began to dream about building a brand new ornate mansion in Savannah's most prestigious residential district.
Now, for the construction of the Lowe house, he went as far as to hire a New York architect, John Norris, to design and build his new home in 1848. Now, Norris had previously designed Savannah's Custom House and was at the top of his prime when Lowe commissioned him. Now, Lowe was, too, at the top of his prime. He was married and had 3 children, including a son, and nothing could be better at this point. But tragedy, as it so often goes, struck the Lowe family at their most successful time. Before the grand mansion was completed, Sarah and the young son died of an illness. Now, Lowe was devastated, especially as their deaths left him the single father of 2 girls.
And being heartbroken, Lowe moved his family into their new home, a home that was truly beautiful. It was Italianate in architectural style, and his new mansion was also equipped with intricate cast iron railings and side balconies that harkened back to the era of Romeo and Juliet, which was, of course, the Renaissance. The interior was just as elaborate as the exterior, and the entire home was a perfect reflection of Andrew Lowe's rise to wealth. Not 5 years after his first wife's death, Lowe married again, this time to Mary Cowper Stiles, who was the daughter of William Henry Stiles, a U.S. minister to Austria. Lowe and Mary would go on to have a daughter who became famous, and the story of the daughter will definitely come later.
Okay. In addition to being aesthetically pleasing, many famous people have visited the Andrew Lowe house over the years, one of whom happened to be the critically acclaimed English author William Makepeace Thackeray. From 1853 to 1856, Thackeray became a frequent visitor of the Andrew Lowe house. While giving lecture tours, ironically enough, Thackeray was not all that good of a student back in England, and for the most part, he was all too ready to visit wine parties. After 2 years at university spent carousing, Thackeray dropped out with no degree in hand, and for the next few years, Thackeray spent his time on the continent. More specifically, he spent time with wenches and in public taverns getting utterly soused with drink. And it's at this time in which scholars believe Thackeray developed what's known as a stricture for the urethra, more than likely an offshoot or symptom of gonorrhea. Hey, that's what you get when you leave a debauched life in the 19th century. No such thing as antibiotics back then. In any case, Thackeray soon lost all his fortune, all 17,000 pounds that he had inherited, and thrust him into the need for actual work. Journalism and then novel writing became his life's work. By the time he arrived in Savannah, Georgia, as one of Andrew Lowe's close friends, life for William Makepeace Thackeray had turned around and blossomed to success with the writings of Vanity Fair, The Virginians, Cornhill, and other major works attached to his name.
In 1870, Robert E. Lee paid a visit to Savannah, Georgia, and Andrew Lowe. He arrived at the train depot in town with his daughter Agnes. They stepped off the train only to find that there was a massive crowd waiting to welcome them. While Savannah may have given in to General Sherman and the Union troops, simply put, many of the Savannahans were still very much Confederate supporters, and the sight of Robert Lee was one to celebrate. Once the crowd let Lee and his daughter move, they went ahead and they adjourned to the home of General Lawton for dinner before going to the Andrew Lowe house for some needed sleep. And it's said that the ghost of Robert Lee is said to still haunt the Andrew Lowe house today. The Lowe legacy continues with Juliet Gordon Lowe. Now, Andrew Lowe himself, he lived a long and fulfilling life. In addition to being one of the most successful cotton factors in Savannah, Georgia, most particularly because they shipped the cotton to a factory in England. Lowe served as a general in the U.S. Army during the Spanish-American War and also as a Confederate captain in the Civil War. He even spent some time in lockup, this was over at Fort Warren in Boston, Massachusetts, because it was believed that he was conspiring with the Confederacy during the Civil War. But in 1860, a new legacy would be birthed. The legacy was in the form of a baby girl who would be named Juliet McGill Gordon, who would in her 20s marry the son of Andrew Lowe and Mary Cowper Stiles. Juliet went more commonly by the name of Daisy and would become famous and successful in her own right as the founder and president of the Girl Scouts. Now, though her marriage to the Lowe had remained childless, Daisy and her husband William traveled the whole world. They lived in England and purchased a Wellesbourne house in Warwickshire. They partied with the Marlborough set in England, with Albert, Prince of Wales. Even if they were childless, they lived exciting lives, until William began to ask over and over again for a divorce. For years, Daisy stemmed off his requests, until one day she returned home in 1901 and found her husband's mistress living inside her house. Fuming and heartbroken, Daisy finally agreed to the separation. Perhaps it was a twist of ironic fate that before the divorce proceedings were legally finalized, William Mackay Lowe died of a stroke. Daisy, as it happened, got the Lowe family home. She inherited it. Some years later in England, she met Robert Baden-Powell, who was a military hero, and he was also the founder of the Boy Scouts. It didn't take long before BP, which was Daisy's nickname for him, had convinced Daisy to kick off the Girl Guides, the Boy Scout sister troop companion. Well, what she then started in the United Kingdom finally found its way in American roots in Savannah, Georgia, when she returned for her next trip. Now, on March 12, 1912, she recruited 17 girls to sign up for the American Girl Guides, and the first meeting was held in the parlor of the Andrew Lowe House. And by 1913, the Girl Guides name was put to the side in favor of the name Girl Scouts. Unfortunately, a year later, Daisy was diagnosed with cancer in 1923. She kept it a secret, not wanting to let others know of the disease. Just 4 years later, in 1927, Juliet Daisy Lowe, Gordon Lowe, passed away, and she was appropriately buried in her Girl Scout uniform in Savannah's Laurel Grove Cemetery. There are ghosts in the Lowe house. You know the saying, if the walls could talk, what would they tell us? Well, when it comes to Andrew Lowe house, we don't quite need the walls to tell us anything. The ghosts which roam the house are active enough
to know that the Andrew Lowe house is alive and stuck in the past. With that said, the owner and director board of this historic home are not so keen on its paranormal reputation. So, should you feel the need to stop in for a daytime tour, well, I'd leave the ghost talk at the door. Now, there's a story about the ghostly butler. According to the former employees of the Andrew Lowe house, one of the most commonly spotted spirits happens to be a ghost named Tom. He's a friendly enough spirit content to continue playing butler in the afterlife. Objects in the house have been moved, as though Tom wishes to replace them to their original position when he was alive. While performing his ghostly duties, his footsteps can be heard plodding on about all the levels of the house, and for those lucky witnesses, they've even spotted this ghostly butler standing at the top of the stairwell. He's always dressed in period clothing and has the general appearance of an older, stately man. But this is a rarely seen apparition. Tom the butler, or perhaps a rather famous Confederate general.
Can just a few visits equate to a spirit attaching to a property for all of eternal life? Well, if you believe the paranormal reports of past employees and visitors, the ghost of Confederate General Robert Lee has decided to stick around the Andrew Lowe house. Those who have seen Robert Lee look-alike ghosts have claimed for him to be an older gentleman dressed in a fine suit and tie, and there have been no reports of this spirit interacting with the living in any way, leading many to believe that it's a case of residual energy. And were Lee and Andrew Lowe close enough friends that the former decided to stick around in the afterlife? Well, perhaps one day Lee's ghost will let us know. So far, he doesn't communicate with anybody.
There is another story about a ghostly rocking chair. As one of the most frequent of paranormal phenomena to occur at the Andrew Lowe house is the eerie rocking chair that moves on its own. The chair itself is a family heirloom and once belonged to the Lowe family, but who might be the responsible source for the endless rocking. Now, many believe that Andrew Lowe himself has set himself up in the chair, relaxing and enjoying the fact that so very many people love to visit his dream home. If it is true that Lowe's spirit has stuck around, then perhaps we can imagine Andrew Lowe and the ghost of Robert E. Lee kicking back, sharing some scotch, and partaking in poker. It's an interesting image for ghosts, don't you think?
Now, many guests visiting the Andrew Lowe house have also caught the scent of perfume on the grand staircase. And perhaps it's a leftover aroma from his second wife, Mary, who lived in the home happily until her death. Or perhaps the scent of the perfume belongs to the spirit of Juliet Daisy Lowe, whose ghost is said to still haunt the house. Visitors and staff have claimed to spot an elderly woman reclining on the bed in one of the rooms, and they're wondering if it's the spirit of Daisy, and many people do think it is. Daisy Lowe died in the Andrew Lowe house on July 27, 1927, so anything is possible, though the ideal of poor Daisy reenacting her last moments on this earth, it seems a bit morbid. So it could be Daisy, could be somebody else.
Yep. Now, if you're planning to visit the historic Andrew Lowe house anytime soon, well, if you do, be sure to stop by for a historical daytime tour. The Andrew Lowe house is one of the most architecturally pleasing in all of Savannah Historic District. If you're hoping to hear more about the haunted atmosphere of this beautiful Italianate mansion, there's no better option for you than hopping on one of the ghost tours. The Andrew Lowe house is one of the many featured stops on the Ghost City's family-friendly Grave Tales tour. You never know what spirits might make themselves known at night, so be sure and join them on a tour when you stop by in Savannah.
I've seen pictures of the house that somebody took, and there's actually a creepy doll room. They called it the creepy doll room.
Is it called the creepy doll room?
Well, she called it a creepy doll room. But actually, it's a room where they have all the old-fashioned dolls around. And when you really look at it, it does look kind of creepy, but it's kind of cool looking too because of the dolls and the old furniture.
What's interesting about this particular house being haunted is there doesn't seem to be any horrible tragedy that would make someone haunt this house. This sounds like it's people who just love the house and decided, I'm going to stick around, man. I like this place.
Right. So they keep. So it's been reported that they see Robert Lee. He doesn't talk to anybody. And apparently they catch perfume, so it could be Daisy or it could be the other lady.
Or anybody else wandering through.
Or somebody else, because they had a lot of guests and a lot of people who passed by there while they were living in the house, and they were famous, and who knows who it could be.
It's interesting they point out that leave the ghost talk at the door. So it's another one of those historic foundations that poo-poos the paranormal stuff, focuses on the history, but doesn't like to talk about the paranormal and the sightings. It sounds like the employees have experiences, but I get the feeling they're told not to really talk about them to guests, even though they do have these experiences on a regular basis. So someone thinks the paranormal scares people away, or they don't understand it themselves and they're afraid of it. Someone isn't really taking advantage of that. Although if they have ghost tours now, if it's part of a ghost tour, it's a stop. So it's a stop on a ghost tour. There's not really a ghost tour at the house itself exclusively. So someone knows about it, uses it as part of their tour. But it's a shame they don't have investigations, 2-hour investigations at night. You could raise so much money for some of these places. We've talked about this before.
Right. Well, I think by now, a lot of people who are into investigating and who like to find out ghost legends about these places know about it enough where it's talked about and it attracts them, but the owner of the owner or of the house or who's ever running the tours doesn't want to advertise it because they want to keep it family friendly because of the Girl Scout connection and everything.
Yeah, but even the Boy Scouts have gotten a bad impression lately. In fact, they're going bankrupt. They're going.
Well, I know, but
I don't know what the Girl Scouts are doing. I don't know if they're reliant on the Boy Scouts or if they're a separate entity now.
Interesting. I was a Brownie and Linda was a Girl Scout, and we learned about the beginnings. But of course, we didn't hear this part. But
yeah, I was a Cub Scout, Weeblo, but I never made it to Boy Scout. I didn't continue on.
It was fun.
But it sounds like they want to focus on the history of the house.
Yeah.
And the history, like you said, of the Girl Scouts and less on the paranormal. But I would imagine, who knows, maybe in Halloween they do events. You never know. I would definitely allow it during Halloween if I was a prude about it. I'd be like, it's Halloween time, focus on the ghost stories. Let's have our own little ghost tour during October.
I personally think it would actually attract more people, but that's just us.
Well, it's funny because most of and we've seen a lot. You've gone in places with historic museums.
Oh, for
and
sure,
stuff,
yeah.
And some of these people just find it offensive when you want to even know about a paranormal element of a location, but they don't realize how much paranormal investigators are woven around history and research.
Yeah.
And reading and finding out real facts versus folklore. And I don't think they realize how involved ghost hunters really go when they look for the history of a place.
There was one place where, I'm not going to say which one it is because I don't want to give it bad publicity, but there was this one place that has a very huge history. You can even feel it when you go in. And I very nicely tried to call who was running the place and say, hey, we'd like to come in, we'd like to explore it, and we're willing to pay you. And we were all willing to pay as a group for that place to go in. And they never called me back. They they weren't even courteous enough to say no. I mean, even when we were willing to pay, they could have just called back and just said, no, thank you, it's very nice of you, but we don't really want to advertise it that way. I would have appreciated a call back, but it just made me think, wow.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have been so upfront about it, but that's the way we are. We're upfront about these things. We don't sit there and...
No, you're in the moment, you're there.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to ask right then and there, because I found it goes either way. It goes to... I found one where we were on a trip, I think, with the lodge.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of the town. There was that soda fountain that was a bookstore.
Oh, well, this wasn't...
with the running creek in the basement.
Yeah, I know. I remember that trip.
And the person who worked there the two people were so excited. They told us everything they saw, what they witnessed.
I remember
this was an old gold mining town, folks, in California. And this was an old soda fountain.
Mariposa, right?
Mariposa.
Yeah, that was cool.
No, this wasn't Mariposa.
It wasn't Mariposa?
No, it wasn't Mariposa.
It wasn't Columbia.
Nope. It was another little one we did on the way home.
Okay.
And it was a bookstore, but in the basement there's a story of a mine. There's an actual
I remember
a
that.
running creek and a fountain down there.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And they had their own experiences with it. Oh, but the owner, she totally doesn't want to hear about that. She doesn't like to talk about it. She doesn't want any of us to ever mention anything we've seen.
I remember that.
But she was more than happy to share it with us. And we thought, well, that's kind of sad, because we were thinking this would be a great little town to do an event, and this would be a great place to investigate, spend some money, buy some books, buy some food. But we thought, oh, if she's going to be that uptight about it, we'll look elsewhere.
Yeah.
So that, to me, that's a business who wasn't really, we were the only ones there for 3 hours. That you're losing that much business that could come in, stay for 2 days, in and out of there, and make some money, just because you poo-poo something and you don't want to talk about it. So, I've seen it go either way, whether they love to talk about it or they absolutely refuse to talk about it. Or the staff will sort of talk to you about it, but not if the owner's around. Or
I've had the staff talk to me about some places. They said, "Oh, we've seen it. Oh, yeah."
Yeah.
And they said, "But they can't do anything about it because it has to be up to the managers or the owners." So
I still think it's that old dogma of, the paranormal, it's going to scare my customers away.
They think it's going to scare their customers away, or they think that it's going to attract the wrong kind, and it's going to make. They think it's going to cheapen their business, but it won't. It'll actually make it a lot more interesting, I think.
Now, I could understand that because a lot of the ghost shows, paranormal shows that are on TV now, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, that was started back, I think Ghost Hunters was it 97, 99? And that ran for years, and they're still pumping out these ghost shows. So this has been over 10 plus years, and shows are still being pumped out, actually 20 years. And they're still pumping out new paranormal shows, and people still watch them. So it isn't like, oh, it's just a fad, I don't want to cheapen my business because of that fad. For some reason, this paranormal investigation phenomena is still going strong.
Well, I hope a lot of people who own these or manage these historical places will open their minds up a little bit. Perhaps if they hear this podcast, I hope one of them does. They'll open up their minds a little bit and take that chance to include the paranormal side of the place that they're running.
Well,
they don't have to believe it themselves, but if they keep hearing it from people and they know, and maybe they've experienced a few things themselves, maybe they can take that chance and see if it works for them. If it doesn't work for them, then they can just go back to business the way they did it before.
Now, when I was gone to the Waverly Hills Sanatorium last month, there's another one. They use the overnight money, they use the tour money, and they turn around and they put it right back to restoring the building. So all of these paranormal tours and setups and overnights are paying for the renovations that would not. I mean, yeah, they had regular sanitarium tours during the day, but these paranormal overnights really are a chunk of money. In this case, it was like $1,500. That's $1,500 for one night, not $200 from the little tours you paid for $10 a piece during the day. This is $1,500 for probably 6 hours. That you can turn around and take that and really put it into your building and really restore it. Now, if you're in the middle of nowhere in an old historic town and you don't have the foot traffic for a lot of people during the day to really give you tour money for $10, $12 to give you an hour tour, these groups coming in small groups of 5 to 10 people, that's $1,500 in your pocket. And some of these olds, even if they're small, people will still pay you the money to do an overnight investigation. So it's amazing that more of these little towns and these historic buildings, if you want to restore them and you want the funds, you might want to think, gee, what are other places doing that's allowing them to restore buildings? And this is a good way to do that, I think.
Winchester House does it, and I remember growing up in San Jose.
Well, they do the tours. They don't do paranormal tours. They do the flashlight tours.
But they have let a few paranormal people in, such as Jeff Dwyer.
That's the TV shows they're letting in.
Well, right, but he's an investigator that they actually made an exception and let him in.
Yeah, but I'm saying they had to pay a big chunk of money to do it.
They had to, but what I meant to say about it is that when I was growing up, they were just they acknowledged the ghost and spiritualist side of the house, but they were they were a house that was only mostly known to the locals. They had small tours, a very small gift shop, and they weren't publicized like they are now.
Yeah, now it's huge.
But I mean, it's huge, but they're actually making money restoring the grounds. They've found new rooms, they've found some new objects in the house, because they're able to restore it because they actually decided to use that side of the history and publicize it more. But I think it's a good thing. Although I do kind of miss the quietness of going in and. Yes
and no. They still are a little poo-poo about the paranormal angle. They do have on Halloween time the flashlight tours. There's like a 4-hour investigation flashlight tour where they take small groups around, and it's like $75 a person. That's a start, but to me that's halfway. That means we do day tours because it's such an oddity. We do these flashlight tours once a year, but for the most part, they don't have exclusive, let's do a 2-hour paranormal tour.
Oh, no, they don't do that, but they acknowledge that side of the history.
A little bit. They don't go overboard, though.
No, they don't go overboard. No, they don't.
But as you saw by our guest we had about the Mystery House before, where she actually worked there and they were setting up at Halloween. Yeah. She had her own experiences.
Yeah, she did.
So they do the haunted Halloween thing at Halloween.
Sure.
But I'm saying as a ongoing, let's do an overnight paranormal investigation that helps pay for the place, they don't do that.
Right.
And I think for the Mystery House, they make a lot of money anyway. So maybe they don't need to do that.
They probably don't, no.
But other places that are smaller, they might have to. And this would be a good way for them to do that, I think.
Now, I think the Andrew Lowe story is an American success story. And it's nice, and it's very nice to be able to do a story where nothing awful happened.
No tragedy.
No tragedy. It was just, and you can walk into a place and you can feel the positive energy of the place.
Yep, spirits who want to be there because they genuinely like the place.
Because they love the place. Yep. They love their life. And I think that the history behind it is a great contribution of the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts came out of it. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and of course there's a lot of beautiful old mansions and old homes, some that we don't even hear about, all over Georgia, that probably have a past, and probably they're privately owned, and unless you know the people you talk to them, they've experienced stuff. But it would be really neat to walk in some towns there and see and look at some of the old buildings and talk to the residents there. And I've always wanted to visit.
I wish I could remember the name of that town that we went to that one day. But they said that, they would love to do that kind of stuff. They'd love to have a conference. They'd love to have people come investigate, but the owner is just so against it. And it's like, why is the owner so against it? But there's a lot of people like that in a lot of these places that either they're just so rich that 5 people coming in to buy ice cream all day is enough to keep their business open, and they have plenty of money and they don't care. Or, hey, you know what would really make some good money once in a while is to do conferences here or tours or whatever.
That actually happened also in an old gold rush town where I was visiting with my boyfriend. We went into an antique store because we were both antique buyers. And it was a 2-story antique store. It was a very old building, and you can walk up the stairs, still a rickety old staircase and everything. And you could feel the energy in that place. It was a small western town. It was near Sonora.
Was it Gold Rush Town?
It was a gold rush town, yeah. And I was up there by myself for a while because there was hardly anybody in the store, and I heard footsteps creaking while I was looking at the furniture and the antiques. I heard footsteps creaking, so I thought, I'm going to go downstairs. There's the owner, and there's one of her workers. I'm going to ask them. So I walked up to the owner and I said, have you ever experienced ghost activity in this store? She goes, no. And the employee said, I have. And she looked at her, she goes, you have? And she goes, yeah. She goes, I have. She goes, no, I don't. She said, never. And then, but she said, but can I help you with it? She was trying to be nice. She said, can I help you with anything? I said, oh no, I just noticed it when I was walking around. And she said, "Oh, well, I'm glad you like our store." And she was trying to be nice, and the employee kept looking at me, and she kept shaking her head, going, I did.
Yep. So again, the owner is so afraid that it's going to scare off somebody. If somebody has the guts to ask you, if they're scared, they're just going to leave. If they're curious, they're going to ask you if you've had experiences. So it sounds like she was just desperate for a sale, and she'll say anything to get you to, "Oh, it's okay, it's okay." I would be curious to ask the employee.
Well, she didn't want to appear rude. That's why she did that.
Did you ask the employee did you get a chance to talk to her at all?
A little bit, yeah. I told her, I said, what have you experienced? And then she turned around to her, because the lady was her boss, and she said, "Go ahead and tell her, it's okay." She said, "Oh, well, I've experienced walking up and down in the stairs, and sometimes objects will be moved. There'll be an object that we place there, and then I noticed that it was moved somewhere else, and sometimes, there'll be a chair shaking." And she said, and I've heard voices in the corners a couple times, and there was nobody there. And she said it happens very infrequently, but it's happened before. And then she said, and then her employer said, "Oh, I didn't know that," and and they thanked me for visiting, and they were very nice, and they had cold drinks. They offered me something to drink, and I don't remember if I bought something that day, but I almost did. But I try to ask with caution, because if they're not open to talking about it, I won't press it.
Do you remember when we did the conference in Sutter Creek?
I do remember.
There's the 2-story antique store there.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was the old surgeon's hospital. It was the dentist/surgeon's hospital.
I remember that.
And we asked it. We went in there and we were like, "It's heavy as fog in here. It's thick pea soup in here." The feeling was weird. And what we knew, because of the history outside that said it's a surgical hospital, it was the recovery room upstairs and surgery downstairs, or vice versa. And we asked him, like, "Oh, if we ever did a conference here, would you be open to letting people investigate this place?" And he thought, "I never really thought about it." He goes, "I haven't really had any experiences myself, but," he goes, "that's an interesting idea." So he wasn't against it, and that was literally half a block down the street from where we did the conference. But that just tells you that it just depends on who it is,
right?
On what it is that you want to investigate. I mean, the worst they can say to you is no.
Right, exactly.
So it doesn't hurt to ask a few questions if you're anywhere unusual.
No. So it's really nice to be able to appreciate the history of a house like Andrew Lowe's, and of course, if there's a ghost aspect to it, to me, it makes it a lot more exciting and interesting, especially if it's a happy history.
Yeah.
John Muir's house has a happy history. I went in there, and it was reputed to be haunted. I just felt positive energy everywhere I went around that house.
Yeah.
So, and everybody, if you ever visit Martinez, California, and if it's open again, I suggest you visiting the John Muir house. Beautiful house, great library he had, and it's reputed to be haunted, but you're going to find nothing but happy vibrations in there, positive.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you just never know when you're out and about, going on a day tour or going on a road trip. If you see an old town, an old historic building, and you know it's historic, and they're giving you a tour, ask, "Hey, do you ever have any paranormal experiences?" You'll be surprised on what some people will tell you. They'll say, "No one's ever asked me that, but," and then they'll relay stories to you sometimes.
Right. Like the Fisher Hanlon house in Benicia, California. We asked, and the tour guide said, "No, but it wouldn't surprise me," is what we got. And that's a beautiful house. Yeah. Everybody visit that place. It's gorgeous.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, there's another historic haunted home for you guys. So if you're ever out and about in Savannah, Georgia, make sure you check out the Lowe House. You never know, you might have a vision of Robert E. Lee on the stairs, or you might see one of the other apparitions.
And you can tell Daisy what your Girl Scout or Boy Scout rank was.
There you go. She'd probably be actually interested to hear it.
Yeah.
All right, folks. So I guess until next week, we'll see you then.
See you next week. Bye.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.